Hello, and welcome to a new idea. A new idea I'm doing, which is to read an author's entire bibliography. I bet you can guess who the author is, um, based on.
I was just thinking, how in the world could I guess who the author is?
How could you not? You clicked on the thumbnail and the title.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
You got me there.
Yes. So if you still haven't guessed, it's Virginia Woolf. Um, and so this is going to be split into three parts because the way I'm doing it is once every month I'm reading a Virginia Woolf text, and by the time that I finish all 12 that I'm planning on reading, I'll have forgotten the first one. So we're splitting into three parts. So the first one are the first four novels that were released by Virginia Woolf. I think most people clicking on this video don't really need too much of an introduction to who Virginia Woolf was. She's one of the defining early 20th century authors, a pioneer alongside authors like James Joyce in modernism, as the introduction of stream of consciousness, and a revolutionary kind of movement, because not only, of course, was she an author that pioneered that, she was also part of the creation team of Howarth Press, which resulted in Ezra Pound and James Joyce and all these people being published anyway. So it was a very integral element to the evolution of literature in the 20th century. Approaching Woolf's work, it was very interesting because I'd previously, before starting this whole thing, I had read Mrs. Dalloway, I'd read Orlando, and I'd read A Room of One's Own before. So I read a little bit of her non-fiction and two novels. And unfortunately, there is a sense of... it's both unfortunately and fortunately, because I knew how good she was going to get. You know, culminating in Mrs. Dalloway in this video, there's a reason I signposted it there, because we truly reach a crescendo of her career. As a result, the journey was kind of one of appreciation, because it's quite often that when you read a classic author's work, or an author's work in general, you're reading their best of. It's like listening to a band, and you're like listening to Queen's greatest hits, and you're like, man, they put out fucking nothing but bangers. And then you look at their discography, and you're like, oh, okay, actually, there's some misses in here. And I don't think that happens a lot with authors. I don't think we tend to read authors such a breadth of their work that you get an idea of an ebb and flow in terms of quality, and the need to improve or innovate and change your writing style to eventually reach a place where you are this defining figure of literature. So that's to kind of give my reasoning for wanting to do this in general. Now, the other thing with Virginia Woolf is that she is such a tragic character, as in her real life self. I mean, everything that I think the thing that makes her exceptionally interesting is the fact that all of her kind of pain is tied up with her work, because she's someone who had a lot of mental health issues, attempted suicide several times until finally dying, and one of the one of the reasons behind that is the fact that she was abused as a child, and by the half brother who would eventually publish the first novel that she ever wrote, or had published, which is The Voyage Out. And so I think that ties together this idea that she attempted suicide during the writing of this book, during the editing process of this book, during the release of this book, which is tied with having her at the mercy of this person who abused her. And she's also declining to marry her future, well, at the time of publication, her husband, but a couple of years before she's writing this, she has rejected the marriage of Leonard, which very much comes into play reading a lot of her work. That you could tell that she's someone who really probably never should have been married. That was never something she wanted. It was very much an expectation, it feels like, because some of the characters that she explores definitely come on the side of, man, yeah, I should not have got married. This is not one of those characters. To get into it, The Voyage Out, 1915, written years earlier and re-edited, put together, rewritten in some parts. This follows Rachel Vinrace, who is this young, fresh to the world. Essentially, she's been. This is her first kind of entrance into wider society, and she is taking a boat trip over to South America, and it follows her interactions with those that she comes in contact with, including Mr. Richard Dalloway, who appears, of course, as Clarissa's husband in Mrs. Dalloway. So both Mr. Richard Dalloway and Mrs. Dalloway, Clarissa, appear in this first novel, which was another reason I signposted with these first four books, because I think there's a real cohesiveness to her journey. Whilst not reaching the levels of something like Orlando or Mrs. Dalloway in terms of innovation and kind of experimentation, there's still a lot of extremely cogent and interesting ideas in this book, because essentially Rachel is a tabula rasa. She is a character who... Oh, you looked at me.
I don't know what that means.
Oh, I'll explain it to the camera. She's a tabula rasa, which is an old technique, which is where a character has no knowledge, and the people they meet along the journey impart knowledge onto them, and by the end you have a character that's been formed by the thoughts, feelings, and opinions of those that they interact with. A lot of stories had a tabula rasa, especially women with tabula rasas there to be imparted knowledge on. And so with Rachel, it's interesting because you take this tabula rasa, the book is about her speaking to men and absorbing ideas and what they think she should be educated in, the books they think she should read, all of these different things. And essentially, she kind of casts it off. It's more about the reversal. It's about why she's so naive, why she's so innocent, why she doesn't know the things that they believe she should know. And so as a result, it explores patriarchy, it explains the idea of a lack of education, a lack of incentive, a lack of opportunity, etc. And so rather than focusing on the idea of what can she learn from these men, it's instead a kind of journey of why are these men keeping it from women, and then looking down on them and judging them and expecting them to do better, whilst also gatekeeping the material. The book does not reach that conclusion because it's still going through the narrative style of a boat journey. It's going through the traditional travel log. And so for about half the book, it doesn't quite make that jump to the idea of social commentary. Instead, it's a very difficult book to read because you're reading a very naive character who doesn't really want to know anything, doesn't really want anything to do with anything. And she's receiving all these thoughts and opinions from these men who are just the most annoying bastards. And he, like, Richard Dalloway rocks up, and he is a slimy man. He is he essentially assaults Rachel. He is alone with her and kind of leers and tries to coerce her. So without knowing the destination we're going on, the journey is a difficult one, and one that, because you don't know the destination, it's uncomfortable. And I did struggle with some of the book because, as opposed to some of the lengths that we get to later, The Voyage Out is a long book. It's over 400 pages, and so for a first debut novel in this kind of style being that long, you can inevitably see that it's a little meandering. I know it's a fucking boat story, so of course it's meandering like a river, but it is a little meandering. The pace is a little slow, and yes, Without knowing the destination of ideas, the journey is uncomfortable to reach that destination. But I do still think it was a good book. If I had just read The Voyage Out, say if I was in 1915 picking it up, would I have continued with Virginia Woolf? Probably not. Like, I'm thinking about books that I've rated 3 stars and by authors now and just kind of put them to the side. So it already did what I wanted the journey to do for me personally, which is reading someone's early work and being like, this isn't quite for me, and knowing that I should give a second chance to authors that I'm reading now, because 3 books down the line, they could evolve into an amazing writer. Book two, we're on to book two, Night and Day, which is night and day compared to her earlier kind of bothered to do that dead joke. Night and Day was in 1919, and for a second novel, it improves in almost every way for me on the first. The Voyage Out has such a variety of characters that I struggled to even remember some of them because they were in and out, and I just everyone kind of had a similar some of the background characters had similar voices, and I just they left my brain. Night and Day, on the other hand, have much stronger characterization. And what I also really enjoyed about this book in particular is that rather than the travelogue, rather than going to somewhere very, very different, going to South America, I think Virginia Woolf strives in a city setting, and this is set in the heart of London where she's living, and the road she's walking down, and all of this, just you can feel the life within the story. It helps so much having that life provided to it by that feeling that the author is familiar with the surroundings. This follows 2 women as the main characters. I need to remind myself of names. I'm always bad with names. Catherine Hilbery and Mary Datchett. And so Catherine's kind of the main character. It's more of a traditional romance, Victorian romance background, one of those Jane Austen-esque feelings of a woman has 2 options of male suitors. Which one does she choose? The upper class kind of snobbish, little bit useless poet, or the kind of dashing lower class man who they have very big societal gaps, and who's a bit more unlikable and a bit more brash with her. And so with that setup, familiar territory. Familiar territory for me as a reader. This one gets into the social commentary very early. Mary Datchett is someone who is working for a women's rights organisation. She's working in an office, and there's a lot of commentary to do around the idea of should she be in the office environment, what the other men think, what do the people who she works with, what do other women think about having the vote. All of these things are questioned within the book, and one of the funniest kind of interchanges is where an older woman is kind of like, well, I don't think we should have the vote. And the Mary Datchett's kind of like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then it has to be calmed down. And there's something really effervescent about those interactions. Catherine is a character from upper class, and it's interesting that this kind of, when they describe lower class Ralph, like lower class Ralph is still middle class. It's very interesting the way that it's done, but he is still of a decent background, should we say. And yeah, he is antagonistic towards her societal disposition, her class status. And those are also, I am a big fan of any kind of social and class based analysis and commentary. And this book really went into the kind of before intersectionality existed. It's of course still like there, it's just not been given a word to yet. And this does go into the kind of intersection of class and gender quite well, and I think that provides a real image. I would say that, funnily enough, they're both emulating a type of narrative through the travelogue and the more traditional romance, will they, won't they, love triangle-esque. They're both using familiar tropes, but then putting a twist on them. And I think these are probably the most accessible for style. I would say Night and Day is a much stronger book. I gave this, I think, 4.25 stars or 4 stars. It was definitely a really good book. I really enjoyed my time with it. It's still quite long though. Still over 400 pages. I just think she did a lot better with those 400 pages. It still goes into a lot of intertextual references, same as the first book. There's a lot of which poets are people reading. What this goes through all of Woolf's work. She's a big fan of lacing in intertextual references, but there's a lot of what text are we reading? Should you be reading this? What does this say about that person? So a familiarity with the authors does do a lot for you, either their personal life or their work, because each reference is kind of telling you something about that person. However, if you get the Penguin one, it's going to have the notes at the back, which will tell you kind of what it means from whoever edited the novel. Book 3 is where we kind of this is the one. This is the one. And by that I don't mean it's the best one by any means. This was my least favourite actually out of the 3. Not because of the quality of writing. I actually think the writing is incredibly good in this. Same as they all are. I think probably on a quality level it's higher than The Voyage Out. The problem is that I think Virginia Woolf just went hog wild. She went ham on this because this is where she introduces her stream of consciousness. This is where that idea really kind of comes to the forefront and seems to rear its head. As much as Mrs. Dalloway is cited as one of the earliest examples, I do think Jacob's Room has that feeling. And it has that feeling by virtue of the plot, which is that, of course, the book's called Jacob's Room. We are following Jacob, but we're not following Jacob. We are following the people around him. This book head hops constantly, and we are experiencing different scenarios throughout his life from a young child up until he goes to war. Throughout that journey, you are, as I said, experiencing his life through other people's eyes, and it kind of reflects this idea. I think it's a really brilliant idea. The execution, maybe not quite as strong, but the idea itself, this idea of presenting portraits of people by virtue of the collected image of what other people think of them. While you're in someone's head, they're not thinking about themselves and how they are and how they appear. Instead, they're thinking about the people in their lives and how they are. And as a result, you get a vision of all of these people by virtue of how others perceive them. And I think that's a really, really innovative and clever approach. So it's not quite stream of consciousness. It doesn't quite go into this feeling of dipping in and out of time, going through time and space. Instead, it is kind of locked in those moments for the most part in my memory. But you are hopping around people's heads to experience moments in different people's minds. Overall, as I said, it is the weakest for me because the character of Jacob doesn't really form anything. I don't think the destination of this vision of a person necessarily works because I just never really felt connected to Jacob. I actually really like the opening of the book, but the further we get in, the less idea I have of who Jacob is. Now, some would argue that's the point, this idea of a loss of identity leading to a war, leading to tragedy. I don't know. But personally, for myself, I found that was the hardest to connect to the later I got into it, despite being substantially shorter at about 150, 160 pages. Which leads us to the masterpiece, the best way to end off the first part of this series, because this is my second time reading Mrs. Dalloway, and Mrs. Dalloway is, without a doubt, one of the best books I've ever read. There are spine-chilling sentences in this book, such as one of my favourites. Spoiler alerts for Mrs. Dalloway. Do not listen if you haven't read Mrs. Dalloway. But it's after Clarissa becomes aware of the fact that Septimus, this young man, has killed himself. Oh, thought Clarissa, in the middle of my party, his death, she thought. And I just think that's a bone chilling. This idea of this journey that she's gone on throughout this day to get ready for a party, to kind of vivify this life, this emptiness she feels in the decisions she's made and the journey she's gone on and the life that she has with Richard Dalloway. And this party is meant to give reason, build up, and provide an outlet for a reason to live. And invading into that is this idea of, oh, death is here. Death has permeated even this part of my life. I don't know what to do. And I just think that is a spellbinding moment. Which, and the line, the iconic ending is just, and there was Clarissa. I'm pretty sure that's the final line. For there she was. Incredible. But nevertheless, this is where the modernism gets into it. This is where it all comes together in perfection, a 5 out of 5. You're following Clarissa Dalloway, someone who is of an upper class marriage. She's married to Richard Dalloway, and she is at a point where she's hosting these parties. She hosts these parties because her husband is hoping to get into cabinet, as in government, and she's hosting these parties. The Prime Minister's coming, all these kind of things. She's a kind of socialite. She's this hotbed of the London scene. And we follow her on the day as she prepares for this party. And as the day goes on, she remembers things from her past, people from her past, such as Peter Walsh appear, and she has conversations, has thoughts, and this is where the stream of consciousness kicks in. This idea of a fluctuation through time and space. You are experiencing smells and as a result, memories come in, and then suddenly you're living these memories, and you think about these memories, and it goes into that idea of what creates what forms a human. What's a better way to tell a story, to get into one person's mind or these people's minds, than telling it from their thought process. That idea of how you jump around. 1 minute you're thinking in the moment, next you're remembering the past, and everything mixes together, your opinions with facts, and it all becomes blurred. And it is a fantastically original and brilliant writing style. And it is masterfully perfected in this book. Not even to get into, because Clarissa is an amazing character. Clarissa is a character who, there's an amazing line in the book where she's essentially like, she's talking about the erasure of marriage, that she's not even Clarissa Dalloway, she's Mrs. Richard Dalloway. And she's thinking about this idea of she's a character who, like, she was bisexual. So she's having thoughts about women previously in her life who she had moments of kind of affection with, and she's thinking about men that she dated and how, what now that she's older, she can't even remember what made her decide not to marry a certain man, and then she meets him again, and why, and she has realizations, and all of these things are done in such a small page count. It's very impressive how incredibly concise the book is, whilst also telling it in a laborious way that doesn't need as many words. It's constantly using repetition to mimic the thought process of people. And like Septimus, to get onto Septimus, so Clarissa, as I said, is this incredible character, but I think the other highlight of this book is Septimus Smith, this man who has returned from war, and before the term PTSD has been coined, she is writing about this character who is racked by what he experienced, and it is the perfect character to use this stream of consciousness on, because the experience of PTSD, that reliving of these traumatic moments, and when you've got characters that are going through time and experiencing things, and we're floating through their mind as they remember things, and you have those moments with him where he is experiencing life in the present, and the images from the past are imposing themselves, not as images. The difference with Clarissa is that she's remembering things. Sometimes Septimus is having it where genuine visions from his past are entering into his present, and those are haunting, and those are deeply emotionally unsettling. And it's Septimus and his wife, his Italian wife, who is just kind of done with it. Like he's talking about how he wants to kill himself and stuff, and she wants to be as empathetic as she can, and then she just kind of gives up. She's like, "Fuck it, do it," like a kind of thing, and it's really Septimus is just the saddest character, one of the saddest characters I've ever read. And it is everything that happens to him is just deeply affecting. And it goes into his treatment from doctors who say they wish the best for him, but clearly have no understanding of what PTSD or what is going on in his brain. And yeah, Septimus has these repetitious thoughts, like I mentioned, where he kind of says that you have to be scientific about these things, and so he's thinking about what's wrong with his brain, and he's thinking about all of these all of the different ways that people react to him, and he puts it all down to you have to think scientifically about these things, and that leads into this kind of overarching idea of progress within the book, that we've got constant images of cars and prestige and how like what people have and who they are become interlinked, and yeah, like the idea of there's a scene early in the book where a car drives by and everyone knows that a famous person's inside it. They don't know whether it's the Queen, the Prime Minister, someone, but everyone then salutes this car and has this kind of these thoughts about this car and who's inside and why they're important. And it's just a wonderful image for the fact that they have no idea who is in that, and it's this kind of overwhelming bowing down to the advantage of technology. This idea that these like the cars are the future, and that whether that's a good thing in general, whether the advancement that we're going through is actually progression, and that goes into the medicine side of it. The fact that these doctors speak to Septimus so confidently in terms of like, you'll get over it, essentially. Like we've given you all the treatments we can. If you're just going to be like this, then you're just going to be like it. That's on you. And that all links together in this kind of idea of how society needs to revolutionize. That after what's happened in the war, there is a chance to turn down two different paths. The same way that Clarissa has a choice in terms of does she regret her marriage and what should she do about it. So both of those ideas, Septimus and Clarissa, are definitely doubles in this book, but they're also doubled alongside the idea of modernization and what society should do after something as traumatic as a world war. Incredible. To further that point, there's a quote somewhere in here, which is one of my favourite quotes in the book as well. Sifting the ruins of time when London is a grass-grown path and all those hurrying along the pavement this Wednesday morning are but bones with a few wedding rings mixed up in their dust and the gold stoppings of innumerable decayed teeth. The word decayed is perfect there, because it's this idea that now society has an option and society could very much lead down what, in my opinion, is very much happening. Capitalism unleashed, this idea of property, of accruing as much as you can, and at the end of the day all that's left is just this gold finishing over what is just a rotten core. And that is essentially what this book warns us of. It warns us of Elon Musk's, this idea of just rotten, horrid people who we allow to accrue as much as they can and take advantage of people. It's a damn good book. Ambiguous, gorgeously written. Some of the way that she uses stream of consciousness, the way that we flow through these ideas, and the way that we flow from one person's thoughts about someone else into that person's thoughts as they think about something else, it all happens so smoothly. Like, truly, whoever coined the term stream in relation to it did God's work, because it is the perfect metaphor. And Mrs. Dalloway is one of my favourite books. I recommend it to everyone. I don't know how this video turned out, but it's done now. Yes, the journey has been successful so far in appreciation. So far, my ranking is Mrs. Dalloway is a goat. Night and Day is very good.
I thought she was a woman.
That's so stupid. Yeah, Mrs. Dalloway is a goat. Silly.
The plot twist none of us were
Yeah, yeah. That's so goofy.
Sorry, everyone.
Night and Day is really good. If you've read some Virginia Woolf and you've missed Night and Day, I would recommend going back to Night and Day because it gives a kind of a very different feel to a Virginia Woolf book. The Voyage Out very much reads like someone's first novel because it has very interesting ideas, but the characterization just isn't quite there, and it overstays its welcome. And finally, Jacob's Room, I think, is some kind of cocaine experiment. It is bombastically unhinged. And I know that people are going to be like, "Oh, that's going to be really interesting to read," like all of these words. But the book is extremely dull. Like it's this. I'm kind of hyperbolizing the experience, which is just that the actual writing process and the narrative structure is bizarre. And like I said, I think it's a really good idea. The execution is just a bit odd as Maisie runs around. So that concludes the first part of reading Virginia Woolf's bibliography. Here we are. So the next ones that I will be reading over the next 4 months, to give you an idea, are To the Lighthouse, which I have not read before, Orlando, which I have, A Room of One's Own, which I have, and her other essay, I believe, like her longer essay, On Being Ill, which I'm very interested in. So To the Lighthouse I've heard very positive things about. Orlando I love, A Room of One's Own is fantastic, and On Being Ill, just based on her life and her experiences, the fact that I think she suffered from like hypothermia or leukemia or something. There was definitely a bad illness throughout her life, alongside her mental issues as well. That I think all of these, because I think that could just provide a lot of context, which I think will be a great stopping place for the next video as well. So, if you did enjoy, please do like, please do subscribe for a new idea. Let me know in the comments whether you've read any Virginia Woolf, what you think of this idea, and whether I was just chatting absolute nonsense. And, as always, have a nice rest of your day.